For over half a century, one name has just echoed through the history of American true crime. He's this phantom, defined by these taunting letters he sent, these incredibly cryptic codes, and a reign of terror that, well, it just stopped. This is the story of the Zodiac killer, a case that is still a chilling open wound in American history. And it all started with his own words. Just imagine, August 1969, a letter lands on a desk at the San Francisco Examiner. It opens with this simple, bone-chilling line. And with that, a murderer gives himself a name and kicks off this twisted game of cat and mouse with everyone, the police, the press, and the public. So before he called himself the Zodiac, he was just this unknown attacker. He was terrorizing Northern California back in the late 1960s, and his attack seemed totally random. He turned these quiet lovers' lanes and city streets into scenes of just unimaginable violence. When you look at the Zodiac's confirmed attacks, you see just how terrifyingly unpredictable he was. I mean, he absolutely refused to stick to one method. He'd use different kinds of pistols, and then, in this one incredibly chilling case, he just switches to a knife. This constant changing of his MO, it made him almost impossible for law enforcement to profile, and even harder to guess what he'd do next. But a timeline, it's just dates. It doesn't capture the real horror. To understand that, we have to look closer at one specific attack. This is the one that gave us our only living witness from a completed assault, and it painted the clearest, most terrifying picture of the man behind the myth. So picture this. It's a perfect autumn day. You're a college student picnicking by a lake. That was the scene for Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. And then all of a sudden, that piece is just shattered. A man appears from behind a tree, and he's wearing a costume that is straight out of a nightmare. A black executioner's hood, sunglasses clipped over the eye holes, and a bib on his chest with that crosshair symbol. And he's holding a gun. The killer's first move wasn't violence. It was deception. He launches into this elaborate story about being an escaped convict who just needs their car and their money to get to Mexico. It was a complete, calculated lie, right? All designed to keep them calm, to keep them compliant, and to lure them into this false sense of security before the real horror was about to begin. And in this incredibly tense moment, Brian Hartnell, probably trying to connect with the guy on some human level, notices his hands are trembling. He actually asks him, "Are you nervous?" And the hooded figure kind of laughs and says, "Yeah, I guess so." It's just so surreal. It's this bizarrely human detail in an otherwise inhuman act, a tiny glimpse of the man under the hood, just moments before he would turn on them.
Once they were tied up, the whole act of being a robber just vanished. The man puts his gun away, pulls out a foot-long knife, and just viciously attacks them. He stabs Brian over and over before turning on Cecilia. Miraculously, despite these terrible injuries, Brian Hartnell survived the ordeal. Tragically, Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later in the hospital.
And this final act, this is what shows you what the killer's real goal was. This wasn't just about murder, it was about getting credit. He walked back to their car, took out a marker, and literally created a scorecard on the door, listing his attacks and signing it with his infamous symbol. He was building his own terrifying legend in real time. But the physical attacks, that was only one half of his campaign of terror. The other part, and maybe the more famous part, was the psychological warfare he waged through the mail. He was sending these taunting letters and complex ciphers directly to newspapers all over the Bay Area. This is the message they decoded from his first big cipher, the Z408, and it is our first real look into his completely bizarre motivation. Notice the misspellings, by the way. He spells paradise wrong. He claims he was killing people to collect slaves for the afterlife. This wasn't about rage or revenge. It was about some twisted, grandiose fantasy he had cooked up in his head. So you can imagine he was pretty embarrassed that his first big cipher got cracked in just 8 days by a high school teacher and his wife, no less. So the Zodiac drastically upped his game. His next big puzzle, the Z340, was a whole different beast. It wasn't a simple substitution code. He wrote the message diagonally and then encrypted it. It stumped the FBI, the CIA, and generations of codebreakers for over half a century. So how in the world was this 51-year-old puzzle finally solved? Well, it wasn't by a government agency. It was by a dedicated team of 3 private citizens from all over the world. In 2020, David Aranshak, Sam Blake, and Jarl Van Eyck pooled their expertise. They used custom software to test hundreds of thousands of possible reading directions until, after all those years, a coherent message finally started to appear. And this was it. This was the message that was hidden for 51 years. More typos, more taunts about paradise, and him denying that he was the guy who called into a local TV show. So, in the end, after all that work, what did the cipher reveal? No name. No clues to his identity. Just another glimpse into his arrogant, twisted personality. So all of this leaves us with the big question, right? What kind of person was capable of all this? Let's take a look at how criminal profilers have tried to paint a picture of the mind behind all this violence. Profilers basically suggest a cocktail of severe personality disorders. He was a narcissist who absolutely had to be in the headlines. He was antisocial, meaning he completely lacked empathy. He was a sadist who clearly enjoyed the fear he created. And his obsession with codes suggests schizotypical, almost paranoid thinking. But unlike a Ted Bundy who used charm to lure his victims, the Zodiac was a faceless killer. He hid behind his symbols and his hood. Okay, so a psychological profile is one thing, but it doesn't give us a name. And for decades now, investigators and amateur sleuths alike have been trying to connect a real person to that profile. The most famous suspect by far was a man named Arthur Lee Allen, a former school teacher. And what made him so compelling wasn't one single piece of evidence, but this whole pattern of circumstantial stuff. A friend told police that Allen had talked about hunting people and calling himself Zodiac before the murders even started. One survivor gave a pretty hesitant ID years later, and yes, he owned a watch with the brand name Zodiac on it. But when you get to the hard evidence, well, that's where the case against him starts to fall apart. Ultimately, nothing concrete ever tied Allen to the crimes. His handwriting wasn't a match for the Zodiac's letters, and DNA evidence that came out later actually cleared him. He maintained his innocence right up until he died in 1992, which left the investigation pretty much right back at square one. And that lack of resolution, that's exactly why the Zodiac case is still so fascinating. It's not just a collection of crimes. It has become this cultural phenomenon, all built on a foundation of unanswered questions. In what's believed to be his last authenticated letter back in 1974, the Zodiac claimed a new score, 37 victims. Now, police have only ever confirmed 5 deaths linked to him, but that number, 37, it just speaks to the scale of the fear he wanted to project. He wanted to be seen as a killer who could be anyone, anywhere with dozens of uncounted victims out there. I mean, this mystery has become a permanent fixture in our culture. It's inspired major movies, countless books, and it created this whole community of dedicated amateur detectives. They call themselves zodiologists, who are still analyzing the letters and ciphers today, all hoping to be the one who finally cracks the case wide open. So after all the analysis, all the suspects, all the decoded messages, the central mystery is still there. The killer who gave himself a name remains nameless. And we're just left to wonder, will he stay that way forever? Maybe his true identity is the one cipher the Zodiac designed to never, ever be broken.